jury will not be sequestered.
I'm Brian Buckmire, along with Terry Austin.
In the Weinstein case, fellow silence breakers and any...
Selection is moving along
Well,
here.
I'll read the verdict, says the Jesse Weber. Thanks for joining
We
us.
don't tend to see it as raw as this.
Good evening and welcome.
Welcome back to Law and Crimes for the Record. My name is Bob Bianchi. We take it to 3 o'clock. We are in the middle of the Rittenhouse trial. Right now on the stand, Richard McGinnis, who was a reporter that was at the scene. As you know, Rittenhouse is charged with 2 counts of murder, attempted murder, and various weapons offenses among some of the charges, more serious charges in the case. He has a jury of 11 women and 9 men that will be deciding his fate. Let's go live into court to listen to what Mr. McGinnis, the reporter, has to say.
Right then was the point that I saw Mr. Rittenhouse running down the street, and I said, hey guys, I gotta go.
Are you able to show us on that map when you saw the defendant running, which you just described, where was that on that map? Are you able to show us that?
It was like, let's see, so we were right in this green right here. We were approximately right here at the green in the parking lot, and he was running this way.
Okay, you just kind of drew a line all the way from 60th down to 63rd. Are you able to be a little bit more specific as to where he was when you saw the defendant running?
So you're saying where was the defendant?
Yes. When you first saw him, you said he drew your attention because he was running.
Yeah, he was. So he was basically right running down this corner right here.
So you've indicated an area right in front of the Ultimate gas station.
It was in front of this. We were over here.
Okay.
And he was here.
All right. So again,
I don't. The gas station's up here. It was down here.
Okay. On that map, I think it's labeled the Ultimate Convenience Center, but it's the gas station that is on the southeast corner of 60th.
That's correct. That's correct. Yes.
And so, just because sometimes these things don't translate into the record, you've used the pointer to illuminate an area in front of the First United Methodist Church. On the east side of the church, between the church and Sheridan Road, there's a parking lot area there, and you've kind of pointed to that as where you were talking to these 4 gentlemen. Is that a fair summary of the location?
I believe actually it was a little bit further south, so it was like somewhere right around here.
Okay.
So sorry, it was actually just a bit farther. Is this south or?
The bottom of the map is south.
Bottom of the map is south, so it was a bit farther south than that, yes.
Okay. And you saw the defendant running. Was the defendant in Sheridan Road when you saw him running?
Yes.
Did you see anything in his hands when you first saw him?
Yes.
What did you see?
He had one of those small fire extinguishers that you saw earlier in the video. It was that sized fire extinguisher in one hand and the AR-15 in the other.
What did you do next?
I told the guys that I had to go, and I proceeded after Mr. Rittenhouse.
Why?
Because, well, he had a fire extinguisher in his hand. So, I perceived that as he was running to some kind of event that was taking place that would be newsworthy.
What did you do after that?
I started jogging after him, and he was quite far in front of me, and I called my coworker Shelby to inquire where she was, because seeing the way that he was running and the fact that he had a fire extinguisher in his hand, I said something along the lines of, I won't use the expletive language that I was using, but something's about to go down. Where are you? We should make sure we're close to each other.
You said you made a phone call to Shelby?
Yes.
Where were you physically when you made that phone call?
So I was in the process of, I was actually jogging, right around here.
You're pointing to an area on Sheridan Road, just to the north of 61st Street.
Yeah. I was probably right around this corner by that point that I called her. Actually, right around here, because I had opened my gas mask bag for the White Claw, and then I ran off without clipping it back. My gas mask actually fell out of the bag. So what happened was the gas mask fell out. I picked it up. I put it back in the bag. I clipped the bag, and then I pulled my phone out to call Shelby. So it was probably actually just south of there by the time I got on the phone with her.
You have given an interview in which you indicated that your attention was drawn, or when you saw the defendant running, that you felt that he was drawing the attention of the crowd. Do you recall saying that in one of your interviews?
Yeah, I think in that interview, I was referring. Which interview are you referring to?
I think it's the one that you gave to Tucker Carlson, actually, but I'm not.
Okay, I believe that I was referring to him shouting medical, and I did notice that when he was running, there were a lot of people looking in that direction. There were like in this area, this parking lot here, there were like dozens, if not hundreds, of protesters or rioters or whatever you want to call them, right in here. And so when he was running, it was like kind of people directed their attention that way, for sure.
You also said that you felt that this was going to be a hairy situation. You also characterized it as a dangerous situation. Do you recall that?
Yes. The combination of the fire extinguisher and the fact that he was running indicated to me that something was about to happen. Potentially, if there's a fire involved. That's why I wanted to get a hold of Shelby and find out where she was.
Did you also feel that the defendant running with an AR-15 through this type of crowd could cause a problem?
In my mind, in that moment, I couldn't think of a situation that would necessitate somebody running through a public street with one of their hands occupied by a fire extinguisher and the other one occupied by a weapon, kind of serving dual roles there. That didn't, it seemed to me, it's not the way that I was taught to handle a weapon in a public place.
Did it seem a contradiction to you to have a weapon in one hand and a fire extinguisher in the other?
I wouldn't say contradiction. I would say that, all these, like in these protest zones, there's like, everybody's kind of serving a role. So there were like those punk rockers that we saw, the skateboarder dudes. They were clearly like kind of a fire brigade type because they all had fire extinguishers. And you have like people who are medics, you have all kinds of different roles. So I wouldn't say necessarily contradictory because generally speaking, I just wouldn't deem that to be a contradiction.
The punk rockers, the fire brigade that you described, did you see any of them with guns?
I did not, no.
Did you feel that carrying around an AR-15 was incompatible with the role of a medic or the fire brigade?
I wouldn't use the word incompatible.
Certainly doesn't match up, though.
I don't know exactly what you're getting at, but I wouldn't say, I don't know what matching means here in this instance, if you could clarify that.
So you indicated that when you saw the defendant running, you left those four individuals and followed. You've described a point in that process where the gas mask fell to the ground, you picked it up, whatnot. Did there come a time when you were following the defendant when he was no longer running?
Right about, I was on the phone with Shelby at the time, and right about when he slowed down, I was still running to catch up. So he did slow and stop, down and around where the eventual shooting took place.
So he starts running, walks for a bit, and then there's a time after that when he begins to run again. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. Where were you in relation to the defendant as you're following him down Sheridan Road?
So he was probably just, at the moment that he slowed down, I was probably like a half a block back. He slowed down probably right around here. And I was like, I could just barely see him. And so I was probably right back here when he slowed down right around here. And I was still on the phone at the time.
When the defendant slowed down, were you still running?
Yes, I was running to catch up with them.
When you eventually caught up to him, how close were you behind him in the end?
So it's hard to, I guess, from the point where he was slowed down, when I caught up to him, it was just a moment after that he started running again. So I guess at that time, I was probably like 30 feet back.
And you described that the defendant then began running again.
Yes.
Was there any event that you perceived, that you heard or saw, that attracted your attention at the same time that the defendant started running?
There were a lot of people yelling.
Do you know what they were yelling?
There were a lot of screams. I heard like an N-word, and you can hear in the video the friendly, but it was mostly just yelling. I didn't hear really anything decipherable.
We've heard some references to that friendly. Now, I know it's hard, Mr. McGinnis. I'm going to try and ask you to put yourself back in the mindset of that evening. I assume since that evening, obviously you said you've given a lot of interviews, correct?
I gave as many interviews as I felt necessary to inform the public of what I saw.
And I wasn't trying to make it exaggerate or anything like that, but
No, that's fine.
you've given some interviews. There have been a lot of videos out there on the internet. I assume you've watched some of those. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. If we can try our best to put aside what we've learned since then and try and go back to that moment, and I'd like you to tell the jury what you were thinking and observing in that moment without the benefit of hindsight or other videos or things like that. Is that
Yes.
fair? Okay.
Yes.
You mentioned friendly. At that time, that moment, in that evening, do you recall hearing that?
I do not. I recall I was on the phone as well, so I was talking to Shelby, and I recall hearing the yelling while I was still on the phone, and I said something along the lines of, "Oh, expletive, I gotta go," and I hung up on Shelby. At which point, that's when the running had started. Like I was already basically running with Mr. Rittenhouse and later Mr. Rosenbaum at that moment.
So let's continue at where you just left off. Please tell us what happened next.
It was hard for me to see because, like I said, I was like 30 feet back at the time, but I could see a lot of yelling. I could hear a lot of yelling, and I could see there was a crowd of people in the street, and one individual, Mr. Rosenbaum, advancing towards Mr. Rittenhouse, as well as a couple of other individuals who were moving very quickly in the area. But it was hard for me to see because I was a little bit back, and it was dark.
What happened then?
Mr. Rosenbaum advanced towards Mr. Rittenhouse. Mr. Rittenhouse gave I think he maybe saw him coming and gave like kind of I said on the night of to police that it was like a juke, but it was more like just a pivot and a run.
Please continue. What happened after that, as far as you recall?
And then he pivoted and he ran towards this parking lot right here. So he was like right on the side of the street, and he ran towards this lot, and Mr. Rosenbaum ran after him, and I was behind both of them.
So the sequence of the folks that were involved in this running, as we've seen in many other videos, is Mr. Rittenhouse is in front, Mr. Rosenbaum is running after him, and you are behind Mr. Rosenbaum. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
How far back from Mr. Rosenbaum were you as the pursuit went through the Car Source parking lot?
Well, it's hard to say because I kind of caught up to them. I was running a bit faster, and so at the time initially I was probably 30 feet back when everybody first started running, but then by the time I arrived in the lot, it was 15 feet.
And you continue to be behind Mr. Rosenbaum at the time that the defendant shot and killed him, correct?
I did alter my trajectory a little bit when I saw Mr. Rittenhouse turn around and saw Mr. Rosenbaum lunging for the front portion of the rifle.
Okay. Let me stop you there for a second. First of all, we know now that that individual who was shot and killed by the defendant was Joseph Rosenbaum.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment this was all going on that night, did you have any idea who that person was?
No clue.
Had you ever heard the name Joseph Rosenbaum before?
I'd never even seen that individual.
Up until these events, you had not seen that individual at any time?
No, I had not.
Okay.
I saw videos after the fact of where he was, but I actually wasn't at that location, that gas station at that time.
And again, I want to hear what you saw and what you know and not
Gotcha.
other stuff. In the videos of this incident, you appear to be holding up your cell phone.
Yes.
Is that fair to say?
Correct.
Tell us about that.
So I got off the phone with Shelby, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen. So I attempted to record on my phone, and I thought that I was recording at the time. It turns out that I actually just took a live photo of the ground. I assume at the time that I pressed what was the photo button instead of the record button, the video button.
So as you're running, you're holding up the phone thinking you're recording video, but in fact you're not. Is that fair to say?
Yes, the video did not start until, and I've turned all of this over, I'm sure you've reviewed it.
Sure.
But it did not start until just as I was arriving.
Interesting testimony from Richard McGinnis, a reporter was at the scene of the incident when this pursuit and shooting actually took place. We're going to take a quick break here on the Law and Crime Network, but we'll be back with more, so please stay with us. All right, reporter Richard McGinnis on the stand during the break indicating that he heard someone say F you, wasn't sure who it was at the time, but later said it was Mr. Rosenbaum. The lawyer again instructed him, I want to know what you know on that particular day. So he did hear somebody say that and yell that, and now talking about the actual encounter just prior to the shooting. So let's go back live to court.
Just to finish that thought up, you're talking about when Mr. Rittenhouse turns around and shoots Joseph Rosenbaum.
Correct.
Just before that, there was a pop sound.
Correct.
Again, with the benefit of hindsight,
Yes.
but let's put that aside. In that moment, as you are running, first of all, did you hear that pop as you were running?
I did hear the pop, but given like the environment, it's not that uncommon to hear those kind of pops. So at that time, it was not clear to me that it was from a gun or what it was from. In fact, I did tell police that it was my understanding that he turned around because he felt like he was running into a corner, because that area of the parking lot where the shooting actually took place was like, there's the wall right here, and then there was like cars parked kind of, so it at night of, it appeared to me that he turned around because he had reached a dead end or something like that.
Could you please pull up Exhibit 25? Mr. McGinnis, we have, and I think I need to turn on the TVs again. Mr. McGinnis, there is a video on the screen which has already been introduced into evidence, and we've heard some testimony about it. Have you ever seen this before?
I saw screenshots of this thermal footage.
Okay. Was that from yesterday or the day before during the trial?
Yeah.
Okay. There's been testimony that there is an individual with a circle around them identified as person of interest number 1. That is Joseph Rosenbaum. There is a square around a second individual who is identified there as person of interest number 2. That is the defendant, Kyle Rittenhouse.
Mm-hmm.
You will come into this video, if you're not already on it, behind all of them. So I'm sure you'll be able to recognize yourself. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this forward a little bit so you can see it. I'd like you to pay attention to the movements of the 3 of you, Mr.
Yep.
Rosenbaum, yourself, and the defendant, and then I'll ask you a couple questions about it. So
Okay.
if we can play it forward, please. Okay, let's pause it there, please. Were you able to see yourself on that video?
Yes.
Okay. And it shows you, can we back up about 10 seconds, please? Go back a little bit further, please. 10 more seconds. Okay, continue there. Go forward, please. Or play it, rather. Thank you. Let's pause there. I don't know if it's possible, Mr. McGinnis, are you able to see yourself on that video at that very moment?
I think I'm one of those 2 people.
Okay. Let me continue forward, and unfortunately
It's
that
hard to
laser
tell.
doesn't
I
work
think
on
I'm
TV.
right. Like,
So
oh, gotcha.
let's continue forward, and I'll pause in just a little bit here.
Yeah, now I can see me.
All right,
yeah.
pause. Mr. McGinnis, I've got a Sister Marciana's pointing device. The judge has allowed us to use. May I approach you on it? Yes. Okay. Could you please use this and go up to that screen in the corner, and can you point out yourself on that video?
I think it's hard to see right here, but can you just go back for a sec?
Yeah, why don't we rewind it?
I'm right under the text.
Yeah, let's go back 10 seconds and play from there. And then, Mr. McGinnis, just pause when you see yourself, or raise your hand when you see yourself, and we'll pause it, okay? Okay, can you hold it up there one more second, please? I didn't quite see. Okay, so just for the record, you are pointing to an area that is on a screen to the left of a vehicle that has, right or wrong, been referred to as a Duramax. Is that a thing, a Duramax?
Vehicle.
Is it? Yeah. A Duramax vehicle. I know from other videos that this vehicle is parked in a way that the hood of the vehicle is to the lower left, or sorry, lower right of this TV screen facing Sheridan Road. So if you'll accept that representation, then you're pointing to an area that is near the right, or the rear passenger corner of that Duramax. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit farther out here, right?
Okay. All right, let's continue the video forward, please. Pause. Can you use your Miss Sister Marciana's pointer to show us where you are? Okay, and you've can you hold it up there for a second longer so we can make sure we all see it? Okay, that is you. Now I can tell from that video that there appears to be part of your body extended forward. Is that your arm holding the cell phone? Yes. Okay. Was that your right arm, if you recall?
Usually it'd be my right arm.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you.
That's good.
You can leave that up there. That's fine. Thank you. You can go ahead and have a seat, please. Now, this is stopped at a moment which is right around the time, I think we're maybe a frame or two before Mr. Rittenhouse fires and the shots at Mr. Rosenbaum. And everyone can see where you're at in relation to that. What I want you what I'd like you to do, Mr. McGinnis, is tell the jury in your own words, what was going on at this particular moment where we stopped in the video.
So basically, I was running behind Mr. Rittenhouse and Mr. Rosenbaum, and like I mentioned before, Mr. Rittenhouse turned around and Mr. Rosenbaum continued, and I was continuing, but then I realized, that they were about to basically collide, and so at that moment, I was still running, but just before the shots, I kind of altered my trajectory of my run a little bit in the direction that I perceived to be out of harm's way.
What do you mean harm's way? You were several feet away from them. What was the harm to you?
Well, once Mr. Rittenhouse turned around and Mr. Rosenbaum continued, it was a very short, very, very short period of time from when he turned around to when the shots were fired. And basically in that very short period of time, I realized that Mr. Rosenbaum was continuing to advance, and that Mr. Rittenhouse was standing still, and that they would be, based on Mr. Rosenbaum's, the way that he was running, and then eventually lunging towards the front portion of the rifle, it was clear to me that something with the weapon was about to happen, and I didn't want to be on the wrong side of that.
When you say something with the weapon was about to happen, what do you mean?
Well, it wasn't clear to me whether the weapon would be grabbed or fired or what exactly was going to happen, but it was clear to me that it was a situation where it was likely that something dangerous was going to happen, be it Mr. Rosenbaum grabbing it, Mr. Rittenhouse shooting it. I didn't know, but I knew that my eyes at that moment were, like in this exact moment, were fixated on the barrel of the weapon, because I didn't want to end up on the receiving end of that.
You said your eyes were focused on the barrel of the weapon.
Yes.
Where was the barrel of the weapon pointed?
At this moment, when he stopped, it was aimed about 45 degrees at the ground.
Did the aim of the barrel of the weapon change?
It did. And when Mr. Rosenbaum lunged, Mr. Rittenhouse kind of dodged around. And then that's when it was leveled at Mr. Rosenbaum and fired.
What was the position of Mr. Rosenbaum's body when the defendant fired at him?
Well, there were 4 shots, but it was like in one continuous motion. It was like a lunge towards the front portion, a dodge around, and when he missed, his momentum continued forward.
I'm going to stop you for 1 second.
Yeah.
When he missed, who's he?
Mr. Rosenbaum, I'm sorry.
Please
Yes.
continue.
When Mr. Rosenbaum did not make contact with Mr. Rittenhouse, or it wasn't clear to me whether or not they made contact, but what was clear to me was that the trajectory of the rifle wasn't really altered by Mr. Rosenbaum's lunge. So if they did make contact, then it was just a glance. It wasn't enough to alter the trajectory of the rifle, but and again, this is just because that was the only thing that I was looking at that point, and it's not clear to me whether he basically fell forward, but that was as.
I'm going to stop you for a second because you said he again. Can you?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Rosenbaum.
Okay. He fell forward.
Yes, like it was as if, if you were to lunge at somebody, if anybody were to lunge, they'd probably stop themselves, from falling face down on the ground, but the shots were fired in the exact instance that his momentum was going forward, and that continued.
Richard McGinnis on the stand describing the incident. Keep in mind, this is a prosecution witness testifying about the shooting. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. An important fact comes out. Again, this is a prosecution witness where the prosecutor is trying to get him to say he was shooting him when he was actually falling down. This witness is now saying he was shot and fired upon. Rittenhouse had heard a gunshot, or there was a gunshot that went off. He turned around Mr. Rosenbaum went to lunge towards the weapon, and that's when the shot was fired, which apparently may have contradicted or somewhat different than an interview he gave to Tucker Carlson on Fox News. Let's go live to court.
Days after this incident says that Mr. Rosenbaum was already falling forward when the defendant used the gun and discharged the shots.
I don't see why that's inconsistent with what I'm saying right now. He was lunging, falling. I would use those as synonymous terms in this situation because basically, he threw his momentum towards the weapon, and when the weapon wasn't there, his momentum was continuing, and that's the point at which he fired. So if you use the word falling or lunging, it was his momentum was going forward, and that's the point at which he fired the shots.
That's exactly what I'm getting at. A few seconds ago, you were saying that you weren't sure if Mr. Rosenbaum started falling because he was shot. But in your interview here, the falling is occurring before the defendant even shoots Mr. Rosenbaum.
That's not what I said.
According to your interview.
Let me clarify. I said that I wasn't sure if he didn't catch himself because he was shot. Because you can lunge forward and then put your foot out and stop yourself from falling. So it wasn't clear to me, for example, if the shots had not been fired, it's not clear to me whether he would have fallen or whether he would have caught himself. That's what I meant when I said that.
At any rate, your statement in this interview and what you're telling us here today in person is that Mr. Rosenbaum was already falling forward when the defendant shot him. Is that
yes,
accurate?
His momentum was going forward. I don't know, this term falling, I just wouldn't use that. So I'm not going to say that because that's not what I said.
You actually have said that. I'm using your
I'm
words.
not going to say that right now because I'm clarifying. It's correct. It was a live interview.
No. You can ask questions, but don't comment on the witness's testimony.
Fair enough. At any rate, whether it's the momentum, falling, however you want to put it, Mr. Rosenbaum was in that motion.
Yes.
Before the defendant shot him.
Yes.
Okay. We can take a break now, Your Honor.
All right, let's take a break. Folks, please don't talk about the case during the break. Read, watch, or listen to any account of the trial. Any questions, anybody? Okay, thank you. I didn't even tell them that. I usually keep it a secret, and then they eat faster. But I was going to say about 12:30, but if you have somewhere, it's something you have to do or something. Okay, let's aim for 12:30, and hope that I can get my haircut looked up.
All right, let's get to this. I have Andrew Scott and Ann Bremner with me, both significantly great trial attorneys. Welcome to the show, guys. Ann, I want to start with you. I had to ask the producer at a certain point in time, is this the prosecutor's witness, or was this witness taken out of turn for the defense? Because none of this is making any sense to me. Let's keep in mind, in this state, you have to disprove, the prosecution has to disprove self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt in order to get to win this case. Mm-hmm. Why is this witness being called? And and he's being contentious with his own witness.
Yeah, I can't believe it. And that's the same in my state, Bob. It's great to be on with you. We have the same burden in Washington State, and we've had that the whole time I've been practicing. I don't know why he called him. And maybe it's because of a lack of experience. I don't know of his level of experience, although based on the opening statements, he seemed far less experienced than defense counsel. And this witness is fighting with him. I mean, it sounds like he didn't interview him or prep him about the Tucker Carlson interview or what he said. Was he falling? Was he aggressive? Was he the aggressor? We don't know. And he's trying to put words in his mouth a lot of the time. I'm surprised there's not leading objections from the other side, although the witness is doing, I think, so well for the defense, they don't want to interrupt him.
Yeah, I was thinking the same exact thing. There are definitely objectionable questions, but this witness is clearly capable and very precise. So, why jump in the middle of that? Andrew, what are your thoughts about this witness? I mean, is it helping the prosecution, number one? And if not, why is he being called?
I think the witness comes off great, and I don't think he comes off well for the prosecution at all. I'm not sure. Well, let me back up. When I say he sounds great, what I mean is he comes off as credible. He's well-spoken. He has a good demeanor. He seems experienced enough both in, protest and what he's talking about, and even appears to have experience as it relates to firearms. So when he talks, he's providing what is, in my opinion, credible testimony. It seems what the plaintiff's attorney is doing here is they're trying to discredit his testimony based on the conversation that he had on Fox News, or the interview he did on Fox News, kind of as like, okay, we're going to get out in front of this guy before the defense has an opportunity to put him on. That's the only thing I can think of using this guy in this context.
Yeah, I mean, we're all about getting in front of bad information that's coming out, but you want to get in front of that witness with cross-examination, not direct examination. And, so this makes little sense. And this is one of the first witnesses these jurors are listening to. And I would be thinking, as a former homicide prosecutor right now, they're probably thinking, is this all you got? This is a significantly credible witness who's saying that the defendant is being pursued. He's being trapped, essentially. He can't get away. There's a potential gunshot that goes off. Rittenhouse turns around this guy, lunges for whatever word you want to use for the weapon. I'm not getting why the prosecution would not want to cross that witness if they were called by the defense. But in any event, we also had another witness that testified about the gathering of so much footage and so much evidence that we have in this case with regard to being able to parse out every single detail. This is the Detective Martin Howard from the Kenosha PD. Let's take a listen to the testimony that he gave.
This blue circle between what I would say the second and third row of cars, Mr. Rosenbaum, correct?
Correct.
This red is Mr. Zeminski, green Mrs.
Yes.
White Kyle.
Yes.
And Richie McGinnis is to the left of the television screen, correct?
To the right.
In pink.
To the right of the television screen.
To the right. Sorry. Roll it, please. Stop. As Kyle, the white circle, comes to the Duramax, this individual, Mr. Rosenbaum, begins to come out of his hiding place.
Yes, he comes around the vehicle at that time.
And he's masked.
Yes.
And he comes around, roll. Stop. Blue, again, Mr. Rosenbaum, correct?
Correct.
And now you begin with the chase, Mr. Rosenbaum of Kyle Rittenhouse, correct?
Correct.
Stop, not yet. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this looks like a classic ambush.
I'm going to object as to the calling for the defendant's interpretation of things. The jury can make their own decision as to what the...
Sustained.
Okay. Mr. Rosenbaum is in hiding as my client arrives, correct?
It appears so, yes.
My client gets to this side of the Duramax, which would be the far side from Mr. Rosenbaum, correct?
Can you repeat that, please?
My client comes to the far side of the Duramax from Mr. Rosenbaum.
On the opposite
correct?
side of Mr. Rosenbaum, yes.
And his circle, my client is stationary, and his circle is closing on my
And Bremner, what do you make of this testimony, adding this testimony to the testimony that we're listening to now?
Unbelievable, Bob. I mean, again, it's really helpful for the defense. I'm just not following this. I mean, plus primacy, recency. You want to start strong, you want to end strong with your case as a prosecutor or a defense. And I prosecuted homicide cases as well, not as many as you did. I don't have that level of experience, but I'm listening to this thinking, what? I mean, is it going to get any better? It didn't get any worse.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you want to come out guns blazing in the beginning and at the end. Primacy and recency are really important. Well, for the prosecution's sake, if you want to win a case, we're hoping that he either doesn't know about that theory and that these witnesses are maybe his worst witnesses. So what do you guys think, fans? Go on the Law and Crime Network, and we have all sorts of social media platforms, and let us know your opinions on whether or not these are helpful witnesses for the prosecution in this case. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. All right, 11 women and 9 men in the jury decided to face fate of Kyle Rittenhouse, who was arguing that it was a self-defense case and that he shot because he was in fear of his life. And we've had our two guests talking about the idea that the prosecution witnesses right now have witnesses that are kind of building that narrative for the defense. So we'll see where the prosecution's going to go, from here. But we also have the police interview that the defendant gave, which at one point he asked that the police actually delete his social media. Let's take a listen to that.
So, can you guys delete my social media accounts? Like, after you guys get your warrant to go through all my shit, can you make sure everything, like, my social media is deleted?
I mean, we can't discuss the case with you, but we'll look into some stuff, okay? But there's a lot of pieces here, okay? Reach out to us, okay? That's your prerogative. Reach out to us.
And I want to go to you about jury selection. Many individuals indicating the most important part of a trial and picking that right jury. And we have 11 women and 9 men that are on this jury. Of course, 12 will be deliberating at the end. I'm curious about your opinions of what's going around the country. It's happening in New Jersey right now with regard to some courts that want to eliminate the use of peremptory challenges or significantly reduce peremptory challenges. It's so funny when I say that's like, I always see a visceral reaction on the lawyer's face before I ask, but what's your opinion about the wisdom of that?
Well, there's no wisdom there. I mean, this is the way it's always been. And in fact, you have a lot more in criminal cases or with multiple defendants. Why would you get rid of peremptory challenges? It's the bedrock of our system. Jury, of course, is the highest duty of citizenship or honor. And the fact that we eliminate in jury selection rather than select, in my opinion, you should be allowed to use peremptories. It's called a gut challenge. It's just basically for any reason at all. I can't see any reason to do that, to save time. Does it make it more fair? I mean, what would be the rationale? I can't think of anything.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask Andrew and you real quick, and then to Andrew, have you ever been in a situation in which the juror clearly should not be sitting there? There should be a 4-course challenge. They either I see you're both raising your head and shaking your heads, yes. And the judge does well, are you telling me you can't be fair and impartial? Right. And then the person's like, oh, yeah, I could be. Or you're telling me you couldn't set that aside and only follow the facts and the law. And the person goes, yeah, okay. And they go into the jury box and maybe they're staring at your client, shaking their head in a negative way. Have you ever experienced that? And yes or no? Have you ever experienced judges doing that?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, Andrew, what are your thoughts about all this?
Oh, it's terrible when that happens. I've had that happen so many times. A guy stands up and says, I don't believe in the court system. I don't want to be there. I hate all of you. And then the judge looks at me like, well, what do you think?
Yeah, and have you ever been in a situation I've been in where you tell your adversary that the judge puts a few jurors on that are so problematic to both lawyers, to both the prosecution and the defense, where you actually kind of agree, like, look, if you remove that guy and use your peremptory, I'll remove that. Have you guys ever experienced that, Ann Bremner?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. It's just unbelievable that you wouldn't give this option to counsel in a case, because this is exactly why we have peremptories. You don't get to cause, but you can certainly have the peremptories.
So, Andrew, getting back to the cause, if you don't, and in New Jersey, you don't even have the right to even voir dire the jurors or even ask them questions. So you are literally stuck with a unilateral person, Andrew, the judge, making the decision. Should we be, no disrespect to judges, but they're human beings and they're fallible too, and they don't know the case, and they may not even have the experience that you do as lawyers. And more importantly, the government has a right to have its jury that it wants. The defense has a right to participate to get the jury it wants. Is that a fair assessment that leaving it to the judges could lead to very unfair and potentially mistrials? Maybe you get crazy. I've seen jurors that were sat that clearly had emotional issues or whatever, but were able to answer the question the right way, and then they couldn't find the jury seat. They were talking to themselves, falling asleep, things of that nature. Andrew, what do we do to correct that if you don't have a peremptory challenge?
I have no idea how you correct it, because every time you see the jury, you're going to have people that have, definite problematic biases. And the other problem is you're going to have people that don't want to be there. And if you see someone who doesn't want to be there and is going to not pay attention to your case, is going to purposely ignore their duty is to be in the trial, they can't sit on that jury.
Yeah, and I guess if we don't have the ability to ferret those people out, I guess us lawyers, both the prosecution or defense, may be in a situation where we're just stuck with what we got, even though we know that that's not going to necessarily lead to a just result on either side. And Bremner, I know you got to go. I always love having you on. We're going to be back with Brian Buckmire on the end of the break. So stay with us. Let's switch gears a little bit to Ahmaud Arbery. Welcome back. My name is Bob Bianchi. I'll be taking it till 3 o'clock. You are watching Long Crimes for the Record, and our very own Brian Buckmire is down there with the Ahmaud Arbery case, giving us some great reporting about the developments of what's going on. Brian, how you doing?
Great, Bob. Great to hear from you.
Yeah. So
today,
we
Bob,
have a jury.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, you go.
So like you were saying, we have a jury. The jury, for the most part, interestingly enough, of the 16 are women, but a lot of people are focusing on the 12 that are going to be hearing the case. That breakdown, they're looking at it from a race-based point of view, with 11 white or Caucasian jurors and only one African-American juror. That individual in his 60s or 70s appeared to give the answers that the defense liked, because of the 12 prospective jurors or qualified jurors that are African-American, they struck 11 of them, leaving only one gentleman.
Yeah, and there was some debate about that where they were asking, I heard, Brian, to have those jurors reseated. The judge had to make a ruling on that. What did the judge say about that?
All right, so with the Batson challenge last night, is that what you're referring to, Bob?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so as we all know, we've been reporting so far that with the Batson challenge, it's kind of a two-pronged approach, and it was interesting to see the judge kind of describe the two prongs. The first, prima facie, just meaning on the face, is there some sort of bias or discrimination? I've practiced for about 7 years now. I've never really seen a judge come out so forcefully and saying, I think I see something here. I think I see some resemblance of bias or discrimination, meaning that first prong was fulfilled, but he's made it seem like his hands were tied because of Georgia law. He actually pointed to Washington, D.C. as a state that has more restrictive rules when it comes to a Batson challenge, that maybe if Georgia had similar laws to other states or the District of Columbia, those jurors would have been brought back into the pool and brought back onto the jury. But he said because of Georgia law, the fact that a defense attorney or prosecutor, in this case defense, has a non-race or race-neutral reason for the individuals to come off the jury, he said his hands are tied and they cannot go back on the jury. So that's why we have the makeup of the jury as we have now.
Brian, to the extent you know, how many of those jurors that may have been excused maybe expressed very strong opinions one way or the other, either Black Lives Matter or the opposite of Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter? How much of that was coming out here that may explain the peremptory uses?
So not for the peremptory, but for the for cause. So by my count, there were 2 individuals who said they had a firm and fixed opinion that the McMichaels and Brian were actually innocent or that they should be acquitted. But there, I would say almost countless a number of individuals, or maybe not countless, maybe in the 30s or 40s or so, that said they had a fixed opinion that could not be changed by anything, that the McMichaels and Brian were guilty. The only individuals that made it past that round and into what's called the qualified jurors, that's where we get the 65, and only 48 of them were questioned. They said they had an opinion, but not one that was fixed or could not be changed based on the evidence they would hear. They said they would be open both to the prosecution and the defense's arguments as to citizen's arrest and self-defense. The interesting part that came up, though, was that the prosecution in that Batson challenge of eliminating 11 of 12 African-American qualified jurors was that the African-American jurors were questioned far more than their white counterparts. And they found, or at least they argued, this being the prosecution, that when both a white and an African-American prospective juror said they had an opinion, but that it was not a fixed opinion and that they would listen to the arguments and defenses, it appeared, based on the prosecution's argument, that only the African-American jurors were disqualified, while white jurors said the exact same thing and found their way on to the jury.
Brian, what's the temperature outside the courthouse there? Are there any kind of demonstrations, or is it peaceful?
Well, both. But this is the first time we're actually seeing demonstrations. What really is happening right now is when Ahmaud Arbery's father, Marcus Arbery Sr., comes out with the Transformative Justice Coalition, they're the ones who are representing him from a civil standpoint. There are individuals here, I would say, this afternoon, about 20 to 30 people who are chanting, "Justice for Ahmaud, no justice, no peace." This is the first time that we're hearing demonstrations, but as you can hear right now, I'm only about a stone throw away from where they were chanting, absolute silence. This only appears to occur in response to Marcus Arbery coming outside in terms of support for him. We will get video for you later on. There's actually a setup just about 100 yards. I was there just before he got on. Those demonstrators are actually having lunch right now. Many of them from the clergy and from the local area, talking because later today, in about an hour, they're going to be just on the other side of the courthouse, marching into downtown Brunswick. Again, only about 30 or 40 people, but we have heard reports that in the local area there have been buses of people coming in. We could expect, I think, about 100 people. Make sure I get this right. The eldest sibling of Ahmaud Arbery's father's family, so his aunt. She is here front line and center every day. I've been speaking with her. I actually sat down with her this morning, and she was actually describing some of the stories that her father would tell Arbery about the local community and how to act as a gentleman, and also about some of the racism that he saw in his age. They're going to be marching later today, and that's where we're going to see a lot more of the demonstration that we didn't see in the previous weeks.
Okay, great. Brian Buckmire from the Law and Crime Network out there at the courthouse. Thanks, Brian, for all that great information. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Bob.
You got it. Okay, going back to Kyle Rittenhouse now. When we were covering this case a little bit earlier, we were talking about how it seems like a lot of the prosecution witnesses are getting the prosecution in a sticky territory with regard to the self-defense claim. And part of that was a detective that testified where there was a number of pieces of information shown. I'm sorry? Okay, so let's just take a look at a clip that the producers say think is relevant, and we'll talk about it on the other end.
Okay, the reason I asked you to come down was there was I was told that while you were being escorted to the car the other day, that you began to tell a joke about the shooting of Jacob Blake, and I wanted to see if is that accurate or not. And it is. Okay. Are you comfortable repeating what the joke was, or do you want to just leave it alone? I'm going to tell you that I spoke about. Well, I guess I'll hear from Mr. Do you want to finish what you were saying? I will tell you that. I've talked quite a bit about public confidence in the outcome of the trial, and regardless of whether the issue is as grave as you presented it in terms of inner feelings, it is clear that the appearance of bias is present, and it would seriously undermine the outcome of the case. So that in itself would be sufficient cause for discharge, but if you want to expand on that, you're welcome to.
No, Your Honor.
Did you want to say anything, defense?
If number 7's unwilling to repeat it, what it was, I think we're at a disadvantage, and I suppose his unwillingness could be taken in the worst light. Based on the unwillingness at this point, I think it's probably the proper course.
Okay. All right. I think the best thing under the circumstances, I'm going to dismiss you from the jury, sir. And we do thank you for taking the time to come down here. Thank you.
My feelings is that it was nothing to do with the case. It wasn't anything to do with Kyle and his 7 charges.
Here, and I have not. I've not stated that you have. It's not. One of the things that I have to do when I have to make judgments, I try to confine my judgments to the things I have to judge and not forming opinions about other people other than that. So I don't want to get into that. The point I'm making is that the public needs to be confident that this is a fair trial, and I think even at the very most, it was bad judgment to tell a joke of that nature.
Katherine Lizardo is a trial attorney who is joining us, and I still have back Andrew Scott. Katherine, let me go to you. A very unusual development. I'm surprised they didn't drill down a little bit more on exactly what the comment was. They could at least do that in chambers and seal the record so that they can at least know what it is that they're talking about. What are your thoughts about all of this?
Yeah, I agree with you, Bob, that I'm surprised it did not happen in the chambers. And when the judge asked juror number 7, can you repeat what you were saying? If I was that juror, I wouldn't want to say it out loud in public. And perhaps that would have been an indication for any of the lawyers and even the judge to say, would you like to do that in chambers so we can discuss this better? That would have been what I would have done if I was one of the lawyers there and saying, let's try to find out what exactly did he say.
Right. And Andrew, what do you think about the way the judge handled it? Of course, the judge has a difficult decision. He certainly doesn't want to lose jurors in a case like this, but that's the reason why they pick a lot of alternates.
Yeah, I mean, this case has had so much media attention in the last couple of weeks based on certain things that have been said. And, really everything that this judge is doing now is under a microscope. So I could totally see, exactly why he's doing what he's doing. I think you remember last week there was a whole issue about certain exclusions and things that were going to be allowed based on, pretrial motions in this case, based on how they're going to refer to the victims and stuff like that. And then yesterday or earlier this week, there was a lot about this judge's criticism from the bench of the media coverage of this. So I think once it kind of came out that this juror was exhibiting poor judgment and possibly biased judgment, I think he wanted the juror off as quickly as possible. If I'm the attorney here, you can absolutely sense where the judge is leaning and what the judge is doing and why you might ask to hear it. And I think the attorney did. He said, well, I don't really know what he said. But really pushing on that and pushing the judge when you could tell what the judge wants to do and is going to do anyway, especially with an issue that, it's not going to be an appealable error for him to take this judge or this juror off the jury. I think that the attorney realized it wasn't worth really spending a lot of his currency in this case and just, letting the juror go.
Katherine, I have been asking all of our guests, kind of popping this question onto them to see what their visceral reaction to it is and what they have to say. Jury selection is the most important thing in a criminal trial. And there are states, and New Jersey being one of them, that are considering removing peremptory challenges from the process for both the prosecution and defense and all jurors for that matter. What are your thoughts about the idea of removing peremptory challenges so that each side has a right to participate in who their juror is, not just the judge?
Yeah, well, I don't agree with that. I mean, the peremptory challenges have been the bedrock. Jury selection has been the bedrock of our Constitution. So it's been there for the longest time. So I can't imagine how that would look like without those peremptory challenges. Of course, that becomes such a big issue I know we're not talking about the Arbery case, but that became an issue there too. It's really not something ideal to do at this point. So that's my reaction to that.
Seems to be the general consensus of everybody asks. Well, in the case, again, the prosecution was getting to the point, have been putting witnesses on that. All of my guests have been kind of like, well, these sound like more like defense witnesses than they do prosecution witnesses. Of course, we're right in the beginning of the trial. One of the witnesses that testified was Detective Martin Howard. We listened to some of his testimony earlier. Let's listen to him giving more testimony. I believe this is on redirect examination.
You were asked a question regarding Mr. Rosenbaum, and at some point during the evening, there's an allegation that he was holding a chain. You've seen photos or something to that effect. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Based on your investigation and your understanding of the timing of all of the events of that evening, do you know approximately when in the evening Mr. Rosenbaum had that chain?
I know location is going to be the area of St. James, because based on the information that we were able to gather, it appears that he obtained that chain from the St. James campus. And so it's hard to put an exact time on it, but I would estimate a couple hours before the incident at Sheridan and 63rd takes place.
before you were shot by the defendant?
Yes.
In your investigation, have you seen any indication that Mr. Rosenbaum possessed that chain at the Ultimate gas station on the southeast corner of 60th and Sheridan?
No.
The defense has alluded to Mr. Rosenbaum being involved in verbal disputes, altercations, whatever you want to call them. There's a dumpster involved, etc. At any point in any of those scenes at Ultimate gas station, does Mr. Rosenbaum have any sort of weapon in his hand?
Just a plastic bag.
Just the plastic bag?
Yes.
No gun?
No.
No knife?
No.
No chain?
Not at Ultimate Gas, no.
No baseball bat or club or any kind like that?
No.
As far as you can tell in all those videos, is the only thing he's ever holding in his hand that plastic bag?
South of 60th Street, yes.
Lower right-hand corner of that screen, there appears to be an object laying on the ground. Do you see that?
Yes.
Can you identify that for us?
That is the plastic bag that Joseph Rosenbaum can be seen throwing in other videos.
All right, please continue the video.
Yeah, Andrew, obviously that's decent testimony for the prosecution, but they laid out through witnesses today a number of instances in which Mr. Rittenhouse is being pursued by Mr. Rosenbaum, and an actual gunshot is fired at some point in time that according to the prosecution's witnesses, eventually turns around with his weapon, and Mr. Rosenbaum tries to grab the weapon or lunges towards the weapon, and that's when basically the shooting takes place. What are your thoughts so far about how the prosecution is doing with regard to defeating the self-defense claim, which under their law has to be disproven by the prosecution beyond a reasonable doubt?
I think they're doing the best with what they have. You know, they have a whole bunch of data here and a whole bunch of information, a whole bunch of video, a whole bunch of social media and other types of evidence that they're trying to essentially take this huge pile of stuff and craft it in a way to get outside this incredible burden to show that self-defense was not, or disprove self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt, which is an incredible hurdle in this case, especially since you're going to have testimony and you're going to be relying on witnesses that may have seen certain things or may have thought they saw certain things or maybe even misremembering things. If you recall earlier, some of that testimony about about Rosenblum lunging towards Rittenhouse, it really seemed like he had said certain things at different points, and it seems hard to believe that such a nuance there and something that happened in such a quick period of time wouldn't be related to problems with memory. So it's a huge burden for them to climb. I imagine that this prosecutor has tried these types of cases before and hopefully has a footprint on how to get there. But right now I'm seeing a lot of doubt. I'm seeing a lot of issues. I'm seeing a lot of conflicting testimony. I'm seeing a lot of stuff that looks like, hey, maybe there was a situation where this guy was in danger.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting case, and always keeping in mind, we say you try the case to one, because it only takes one juror to say they didn't disprove the case beyond a reasonable doubt on self-defense, or they didn't prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. I just don't feel comfortable making a conviction. So prosecution, I think, has got a long way to go. We're going to take a break right now, though. Sierra Gillespie from the Law and Crime Network is actually at the Rittenhouse courthouse. We're going to do a phone interview with her on the other end of the break, so stay with us. Here in day 3 of the Kyle Rittenhouse case, with 11 women and 9 men that are going to be deciding the fate of the 18-year-old who's charged with 2 counts of murder, attempted murder, various weapons offenses dating back to August of 2020. We have our very own Sierra Gillespie. Is going to give us a little phone interview out there in Kenosha, Wisconsin. What's going on? What's the temperature like out there, Sierra?
Yeah, it's pretty chilly if we're talking about the weather here in Wisconsin. It's no surprise that it's pretty cold. But as far as the Rittenhouse trial itself, it is fast paced. It is heating up here. We've heard a lot of testimony starting on Tuesday into today, and then just a lot. There's really just a lot going on here.
Yeah, I've you know, we don't get to watch everything, but I mean, Long Crime is covering gavel to gavel. But we were talking with our guest today that it seemed like there's a number of witnesses that the prosecution have called where to the stand that I've had to ask, is this the prosecutor or the defense attorney that's asking these questions? Because they seem to kind of support Rittenhouse's self-defense claim. Am I missing something with that?
Honestly, I feel like that's what is happening here. I mean, I was in the courtroom live yesterday. I heard the witnesses that we heard yesterday. It was Corey Washington, who was a live streamer there in Kenosha during the unrest, followed by Detective Martin Howard, who was the lead detective on the case. And honestly, a lot of the points that they said really led to the defense's claim of self-defense, that Rittenhouse was just acting to protect himself, that he was being egged on at times by Joseph Rosenbaum, who was one of the victims, and other people who were in the area. They've also referenced another shooter. His name is Joshua Zeminski. Before Rittenhouse ever fired a single shot, Zeminski himself shot a gun, just one single shot up in the air. And after that, that's when Rittenhouse started firing his weapon into Rosenbaum. So this is something we've heard a lot from multiple witnesses, again, that he was being egged on and that he was not the first person to fire any shots.
Yeah, one of those witnesses testified today was actually a reporter. He seemed like a very credible and squared away guy who was actually pursuing them when they were running, when Rosenbaum was running after Rittenhouse, basically indicating he kind of got cornered Rittenhouse at a certain point in time, that there sounded like gunfire. That's when Rittenhouse turned around with his weapon pointed in a 45-degree angle towards the ground. And Rosenbaum kept going towards Rittenhouse. He knew there was going to be some sort of confrontation. And that is when the shooting actually took place. Is that consistent pretty much with what the other witnesses are saying as well?
So Richie McGinnis is the witness that you're referring to. He is also a videographer who was on the scene kind of following Rittenhouse and some of the people along with him. He was the one who was right next to him when the shooting happened. So he has the clearest account that we've heard so far. But as of what we've heard from both the detective yesterday and then Corey Washington yesterday, who was live streaming, it does sound like Rittenhouse was being chased. He was being approached by Rosenbaum before any of the shots were fired. So it does kind of seem consistent with what we've heard from those other witnesses.
And we also know that under Wisconsin law that the government, the prosecutors have to disprove self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt. Each state is a little bit different about that. You got jurors there, they're human beings that are listening to it. We often refer to as imperfect self-defense. It may not necessarily meet the definition, but the jurors put themselves in the place of that particular individual and kind of say, I kind of get it, leading maybe even one juror to say, I just can't convict. Do you see that as a real possibility in this case?
Honestly, I'm not sure which way this case is going to lean. A lot of people are asking me that since I was in the courtroom, and you can feel the tension in there. It was really nice that I was actually in there yesterday, though, because I could see the jurors themselves. So many of them are so intently focused. So many videos and photos have been shown throughout this case. And the jurors themselves have their eyes glued to the screen. They're taking vigorous notes. I know occasionally at times juries can be kind of boring. You know, you fall asleep, you might nod off, whatever. That is not the case here. I can say from being in the courtroom, everybody is paying very close attention. And again, in Wisconsin, this whole thing about disproving the self-defense, I think that's going to be very tricky for the prosecution moving forward. So this might end up panning out in Rittenhouse's favor. I guess we'll just have to see.
Well, Sierra, well, thank you so much for the great insights and what you're doing for us here at the Law and Crime Network. Looking forward to more reporting coming from you. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
You got it. Okay, so one of those witnesses that she was talking about was Detective Howard. We've been showing you some of the clips with respect to his testimony, but there was also a re-cross-examination that occurred that got a little testy. Let's take a listen to that.
You testified on redirect about Marsy's Law. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And you were told by someone, or Detective Antarami was told by somebody about Marsy's Law, and you couldn't go in the phone even though there was a signed search warrant, correct?
It was erring on the side of caution.
Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong, but your department went into Mr. Huber's phone without a search warrant.
He's deceased.
He's still a complaining witness, decedent, or victim, however you want to label him, correct?
I think it's different if someone is deceased, then they don't even have the ability to give consent.
Their estate, correct? What I'm getting at is, you went in the phone without a warrant for Mr. Huber, correct?
We don't need search warrants if they're deceased.
That's your opinion, correct?
Yes.
Okay, you went and you got a search warrant, which you drafted and were the affiant, meaning you swore to it, for Mr. Groskwitz's phone, correct?
Correct.
And then it was never executed, correct?
No, because I did not feel comfortable with my knowledge of Marcy's Law, and I wanted to err on the side of caution with that.
He's nodding at you right now, isn't he?
He's what?
I'm pointing at Mr. Binger as he's nodding at you, correct?
I was not even looking at Mr. Binger, I was looking at you.
Okay. Last night, during the break overnight, did you talk about this testimony?
No.
Nobody from, can I finish the question?
You can finish.
Nobody from the Racine Kenosha District Attorney's Office about this issue. Never talked about it.
No.
Okay. If you don't have a search warrant, you can get into the phone other ways, correct?
Which phone are we talking about?
Groskwitz's.
I see you have consent on one side or a search warrant on the other side.
Okay. And consent was asked for, correct?
Correct.
Was turned down, correct?
Correct.
Nothing further.
Katherine, any thoughts on where they're going with that? And I thought it was odd. You get a search warrant, but then you decide not to execute it. I mean, a judge is basically saying, yes, you've shown the probable cause to get into the phone, but you don't execute. What is this all going to?
You know, the defense is trying to attack his credibility. That's where I'm seeing this. He's trying to say there was a search warrant and you shouldn't have done what you did. But what I found interesting is he was asking questions that it's clear that he didn't know what the answer would be, especially when he asked that the prosecutors talked to you last night, didn't they? And he flat out just said no. He's trying to imply that that witness is biased for the prosecutor. And it sounded nitpicky to say, oh, he's nodding at you right now, right? Implying that, oh, you're agreeing with him, or he's trying to feed you information or how to testify. But it's not coming across that way. If I was watching that as a juror, it's coming across as why is it relevant?
Yeah, Andrew, what are your thoughts about where he's going with this and whether it was effective? And certainly, if I've had this happen where witnesses looking at the prosecutor or vice versa, and then they're not, and people are nodding, and there's like unsettled or verbal communication going on. And I've pointed that out. But what did you think?
I thought the defense attorney is coming off pretty heavy-handed here. I think he's coming off pretty accusatory and, frankly, not very well. I get that he's got to try to play a point. He's got to advocate for his client, but he also, and he knows this because he's been doing this long enough, but he knows how much being likable in front of the jury is important here. While I was watching him do, most of those questions and kind of make accusations, he was coming off kind of, aggressive. He's coming off like he was trying to make a point. And, with a lot of those type of things, if you're going to try to make that point, you gotta make the point. You can't make the point, make the accusation, and then have it look like you were just making a blatant accusation or a false accusation of either witness coaching or whatever. So I don't think the defense attorney is coming off, at least in that clip, very well.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly the prosecution is doing a better job for the defense maybe than the defense attorney is, in this case, at least at this
They
point.
can switch spots.
Yeah, right. Katherine, but there is something to say for the fact that when I used to teach people how to do cross-examination, every witness is different. You can't be on the same speed. You don't cross-examine a grandmother coming in to provide an alibi for their grandson the same way you would as a police officer who's kind of mouthing off to you. You have to change your speeds. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, when you're doing your cross, you have to know, your witness's demeanor already, and they would have gotten that flavor. When I was watching that investigator testify, he was so calm and he appeared likable and credible. And then during the cross, you come across as belligerent or, like my colleague said, just accusatory, and you can tell that the witness is trying to push back. Like, no, I'm not being biased, or there's nothing else that I can say that I'm participating with the prosecutor. And you mentioned that, yeah, sometimes you're nodding at the witness, or you would have to point that out if the other opposing counsel is making that kind of gesture, because it might allude as, colluding with the witness. But then again, you have to pick and choose your battle. And with that clip, it didn't look effective for me.
Okay, yeah, excellent commentary, guys. All right, we're going to take a quick break here on the Long Crime Network. We're waiting for them to come back live. If not, we're going to pick out some of the really, really good clips, especially from today, from testimony that I think is really relevant. That helps the defense, in my mind, from prosecution witnesses. Stay with us. We'll be right back. All right, so we're covering the Kyle Rittenhouse case, and we had some very important testimony that came out this morning. They're on break. We're waiting for the witness to resume the stand. Richard McGinnis, who is a reporter who actually saw Kyle Rittenhouse running with a fire extinguisher, caught his attention. He started running and actually witnessed this chase between Rosenblum, Rittenhouse, and himself. And so he had a bird's eye perspective on what was going on, being asked a lot of questions about the crowd size, guns potentially being fired, curses that were being made, and actually described Rittenhouse as being cornered at a certain point in time. Let's listen to a little bit of that testimony.
What are you doing out here? Obviously, you're armed and you're in front of this business we saw burning last night. So what's up?
So people are getting injured, and our job is to protect this business, and part of my job is to also help people. If there's somebody hurt, I'm running into harm's way. That's why I have my rifle, because I need to protect myself, obviously, but I also have my med kit.
And what about these other folks? Obviously, there's some other people who are armed as well.
Their job is to protect me.
Gotcha. And then what about these guys up on the roof?
Their job is to provide overwatch to protect me also.
Gotcha.
They're protecting everybody on the ground. We're protecting each other.
Understood. And
we're running medical, and we're going in, and we're getting people.
And what about, are you from the area?
I am from the area.
What brought you out here tonight? You just wanted to provide medical attention?
Provide medical attention to the people that need it. If somebody's injured, like, you get hurt, I'm grabbing you.
All right, Katherine, this is like in the beginning of this whole incident. I mean, it's an amazing interview that he was able to actually pursue with this whole chase that went on. How valuable is this witness to the truth of the matter, whether it's in favor of the prosecution or defense?
Yeah, this witness is very favorable and very important, not favorable, but very critical to this case. McGinnis is actually related to one of the charges against the defendant, which is reckless endangerment. So it's good to hear from him firsthand as to what he felt, because one of the charges is related to him. Also, too, he was so close. That's why his testimony, I was glued to what he has to say, because I want to know what he saw. He's the closest person there, eyewitness-wise, and he would be credible. And this witness, McGinnis, he is also a reporter. And in his testimony, he testified that he's seen a lot of these kinds of situations, riots, protests, and he's covered them. So he has experience of what to look for. And that video you showed, I have to say, though, that I was a little bit perplexed why that was shown. It made me feel that that Rittenhouse is likable and was there to help at the beginning. So.
Yeah, it's again, like we said, it's a strange witness, but the court, I believe, has resumed with the testimony, Mr. McGinnis. So let's go live.
The detective, that you felt something on your leg, and your first thought was that you had been shot, correct?
I was worried of that, absolutely. I'm not sure whether it was something that actually, actually contacted my pants, or whether it was just the, sensation sound, but it caused me to look down, and I did, stamp my legs to make sure that they felt okay.
Did you feel that the defendant's actions of turning around and pointing the gun and discharging those rounds put you in danger?
I would say that, given where I was, certainly I was in danger. Yes.
Let me back up 1 second. We've talked a lot about Mr. Rosenbaum's actions towards Mr. Rittenhouse, and I just want to clarify one part of that. At any point, did you see Mr. Rosenbaum touch the defendant's gun?
It's hard for me to say whether he actually made contact with the gun, but what I can say is that they were extremely close, and that if he did, then it didn't alter the trajectory of the weapon. So if he did, it wasn't like, he got a hand on it. It was maybe barely grazed it, but they were very close. And it was actually, since I was behind him, his body was partially obstructing the barrel of the gun at that time. So it's hard for me to say definitively whether or not he actually made contact, but not that I saw. I couldn't say definitively.
I couldn't hear the last.
Oh, which part? Last sentence. I couldn't say definitively whether or not there was contact made.
We know from all the videos, from all the evidence, Mr. Rittenhouse fires 4 rounds. You testified earlier, Mr. Rosenbaum winds up face down on the ground, correct?
Correct.
What did you do then?
Well, after the shots were fired, there were other shots that were going off, and at this point, I'm aware of the fact that that's probably gunfire. Mr. Rittenhouse, from my perspective, had run away, and Mr. Rosenbaum was lying behind a car, and so I knew that he was, given the shots were fired at such close range, that he had to have been hit. And he was lying lifeless on the ground, and so I saw him behind the car, and I saw it as both a place that I could get safety, but also help him. And so I ran over. I said something along the lines of, "Are you okay? I'm going to flip you over slowly." And then I flipped him over, and at that point, other people were arriving, and that's basically all the rest is on video. But we were trying to. I presume that there were, given the weapon that he was using, that there had to be big wounds, and as people arrived, we were looking for those, and then somebody shouted that there was a hospital across the street. At which point, I told one individual to grab his other arm, and we carried him across the street. Should I just continue with?
Let me stop you there for a second. Can we please play Exhibit 19? 19?
Okay, while they're getting that ready, let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more of this fascinating testimony. All right, Richard McGinnis still on the stand, the on-scene reporter, talking about after the shots were fired, his and other attempts in order to help Mr. Rosenbaum. Let's go back live report.
I can't really imagine what I would have done, but was afraid in that moment anyways. So it's hard for me to say.
The individual who you sensed next to you, we now know the defendant, you said he pulled out his phone.
I just saw his hand go into his pocket, and that, like, from my perspective, that's all that I saw. And I assumed that, you know, that was, you know, I had said call 911, hand went into the pocket. I assumed that that was what was happening.
Did you hear the defendant say anything at any point after he shot Mr. Rosenbaum?
I did not, no.
Can we please play Exhibit 15? And just so you know what to expect, sir, this is going to be the video you took of Mr. Rosenbaum's body. I apologize, but I need to show it. I'm sorry.
You okay? Just don't move, man. Don't move. All right, can I flip you over real quick? I'm gonna flip you over real quick, bro. Here, flip over real quick. Just gotta get pressure on this, dude. Where's it at?
Where is it? Turn around.
Where's it at, dude? Get a light on it. Get a light. Give me a fucking light.
Put pressure on it. Put fucking
Where?
pressure on it.
Where, dude? Where? Where's the hole?
Wait, where you at?
Get the
It's
fucking
right
mask
here
up.
in his head. Come on. Put pressure. Put pressure. Put pressure. Put pressure. Do you want pressure? Hey, keep your eyes open. Keep your eyes open. You shot him.
I didn't. I don't know.
Hey, good. You're okay. You're okay.
Just get pressure on this shit.
But you gotta keep him alive.
I got him, brother. I got him. Talk to me, bro. What's your name, bro? Stay with me. Hey, what's your name, bro? What's your name, bro?
Is y'all thinking the hospital right here?
Yeah, get him up. We got a car. We got a car. Yo, keep pressure on it.
I got him. Get him. I got him.
Keep pressure on that.
I got him. Get his arms. Put that.
I got you, dude. I got you. I will carry you.
Guys, make sure he has a hold.
Hey, keep his head. Keep pressure. Keep
The video we just watched was one you were recording, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Earlier you described holding your phone up as the chase is going on, and the phone wasn't set to record video.
Mm-hmm.
At what point did you realize that and make a switch?
I have no idea. Okay. I have no clue. I don't know how it went from photo to record, and I don't know how it started at that particular moment. I actually, I did call my CEO of my company immediately afterwards from the hospital and told him that I had recorded a homicide. And then I looked at my phone and I realized that it wasn't recording at the time.
I think you testified a little bit ago, and I want to pick up where you left off, that you attempted to treat Mr. Rosenbaum, and then there's a process by which he is carried over to the hospital. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Can you tell us about your involvement in that process?
Well, my hand was on his head, and I was under his right shoulder. There was another individual under his left shoulder, and then there were maybe one or two people carrying his legs. And we ran across the street, and there was somebody who told us that he worked at the hospital and that we should put him in the car to get him there quicker, at which point he opened the tailgate. We loaded him into the back of the car, and there were people actually, there's a large crowd around the back of the car, couldn't close the tailgate, and so we just said, forget the tailgate, and we drove down a small ramp. And at that point, I was alone in the back with Mr. Rosenbaum. And I was just telling him that we're going to have a beer together afterwards, and it was all going to be okay. And once we arrived, a gate had to go up, and we went through the gate, and that was like right next to the ER. And I helped some medical personnel came out with a gurney, and then I helped them load him onto the gurney.
All right, so this is the journalist, Richard McGinnis, who actually witnessed all of this, got a lot of it on video. He's also one of the victims for the reckless endangerment charge, but he's given a lot of good information for the defense, so it's going to be really important to see how the defense cross-examines this witness. We will see that on the other end of the break, so please stay with us. We'll be right back. Direct examination is closing up. Richard McGinnis indicating the journalist that he, after the whole thing was over, it was surreal, and he was scared because he knew that he would have to do things afterwards because of what he had witnessed. Looks like the defense is getting ready to cross-examine, so let's go back live to court.
After you left the hospital, you went to the Kenosha Police Department, correct?
Yes.
And you were interviewed shortly after this happened by a detective, Separus.
Yes.
And that's not either of these two individuals here, correct?
No.
And you gave them video, taped, and sound recorded statement, correct?
Correct, yes.
And that was in a room with a small table and carpeted walls?
Yes.
And you stated to Detective Separus, and I'm quoting from your interview, the guy who I interviewed was trying to evade him. When you're using the term guy who you interviewed, who are you referring to?
Mr. Rittenhouse.
Okay, and he was trying to evade whom?
Mr. It depends on what instance you're talking about, but initially it was very difficult for me to tell who he was evading because the street was dark and I was a ways back. There were a number of individuals kind of moving in his direction, and there was a lot of noise, so it wasn't clear to me who he was evading initially when he started to run.
Okay, but you used the word him, which should be singular. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. I believe that in that same statement, though, I said that there were a couple of individuals, including the man who was shot.
I'll read from your statement at page 20. And there were other people who were moving very quickly, and I noticed two guys who were moving quickly. One of the ones was the guy who ended up, I guess, getting shot and dying, and they were moving towards him. So he was, according to what I saw, trying to evade these individuals.
Yes.
Okay, so one of the individuals is the guy who gets shot, Mr. Rosenbaum.
Correct.
And the other one is somebody who, to this day, you would not know who it is.
No, yeah, it was dark, and it was very difficult to identify. I don't think I could, no.
And you had interviewed Kyle before this shooting, maybe 15 minutes?
It was like 14.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm off of
I had the metadata
Okay.
in my phone, so
Okay.
according to the metadata on the phone, it was about 14 minutes.
Okay. And when you met Kyle and you interviewed him, he was not menacing to you, was he?
Beyond that he had a weapon, no.
Okay. So what was menacing was the weapon.
When I said menacing in that context, it was the situation that was menacing, which is a number of armed individuals. And specifically in that instance, I was most nervous about the individuals on the roof because I couldn't see them. So it was just more concerning to me because at least, the folks on the ground, I could see them.
Okay. And Kyle was one of the ones on the ground?
Yes.
And the interview, which Mr. Binger took from and referred to the menacing word, was you being interviewed by a Kyle Horton, and that interview was 26 minutes long, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And you used the word menacing once.
I guess so. You went through it, so I'll take your word for it, but I don't recall saying it another time.
Okay. And this is your word to Detective Separus. No, it's cool, but he did. I mean, the interview, he was very cordial. Detective, yeah, you, very nice, and almost seemed like innocent. Almost seemed like too much for his own good. Do you remember that statement?
Yes, I do.
And you're referring to him being too innocent for his own good, correct?
I was alluding to the fact that it seemed to me that a lot of the people, protesters, rioters, whatever you want to call them, were casting negative looks in his direction, and he wasn't. He didn't seem to be aware of that.
Meaning Kyle wasn't aware of how the people
how pissed off the people were. Not in his group, just the group. Generally speaking, the people who were on the ground, who had just been, basically volleyed back by the law enforcement. Those people, not the other armed individuals.
The rioters didn't like the people with long weapons. Is that a fair statement? The way you perceive it?
That's a fair statement in my perception. Yes. I think it was also additionally that I was referring to the fact that he was shouting medical, and that people were looking at him negatively, kind of like angry when they heard, him, and then saw presume his weapon or whatever it was that made them mad.
I didn't mean to cut you off. I apologize. That's where you talked about the duality, a medic having a gun, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And he might not have perceived the problem with that dual role based upon your conversations with him.
Yeah, he might not have perceived how other people perceived him in that situation.
Okay. Reading from a statement from you. I don't know if it was the fire extinguisher or if it was a piece of metal or something kicked something. I have no idea. But when I turned back, the fire extinguisher is gone, and he had the AR-15 kind of like aiming downwards. And at that point, they were heading into the parking lot. And he was kind of facing backwards, and the individual who got shot was advancing towards him, and he actually dodged. He dodged around, and then he ran backwards, so he almost like he turned his back a little bit. You're describing him running away from Mr. Rosenbaum there, correct?
Correct.
And as Mr. Rittenhouse is running away from him, Mr. Rosenbaum is in pursuit, correct?
Correct.
And at one point, Kyle turns around with a weapon, and you're talking about it being in a downward position, but towards Mr. Rosenbaum.
Yes. Are you talking about the final instance where he turned around? Or
The first instance.
Yes.
Okay. And this isn't where Mr. Rosenbaum gets shot, correct?
Correct. That was, he was kind of up on the curb, and he kind of headed in the direction towards the car lot, and then he stopped and turned.
And then he continues running, and Mr. Rosenbaum continues to chase Mr. Rittenhouse.
Correct.
Didn't he see? I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, not at all. The instance where I described that there were two individuals, that was kind of at that point in time. So I didn't zero in on Mr. Rosenbaum being kind of the one person pursuing him until after that first kind of juke and run.
Okay. And do you remember Mr. Rittenhouse turning around in the parking lot when Mr. Rosenbaum is chasing him, just Mr. Rosenbaum chasing?
Yes.
Okay. And this is before the final confrontation.
When he turned around initially, he was kind of on the sidewalk before they got into the lot, and that was when it wasn't clear that Mr. Rosenbaum was the sole, because it was very dark. So perhaps I'm assuming that was him, but also like I was fumbling with my phone at that juncture, and I was hanging up with Shelby. That was kind of all happening in that simultaneous moment. So it's hard. I didn't identify Mr. Rosenbaum until we kind of entered the lot where it was very light.
Okay.
Well lit.
And when he enters the lot, Mr. Rosenbaum, it's Kyle and Mr. Rosenbaum really in that area where the shooting occurred. There's nobody else.
Yes, correct.
And he runs, according to your vantage point, basically as far as he can.
Yeah, I did state to the police the night of that it appeared that when he stopped, he entered an area where there was like a car parked and a wall. I mean, it would have been conceivable that, you know, you could have, the car was like not, it wasn't up against the wall, like you could conceivably have continued, but it seemed to me, my perception that night, that he, you know, had entered a bit of a dead end, or at least felt that way.
And he turned and looks at Mr. Rosenbaum.
Correct.
And Mr. Rosenbaum knows that he's chasing an armed individual, correct?
I'm going to object, Your Honor, it's to speculation.
He's seen the gun.
You know, well, it is, you don't, you don't know what he
Okay,
saw.
I'll ask it this way.
Okay.
Mr. Rittenhouse turns around, has a firearm in his arms, hands, correct?
Correct.
The AR, as we refer
Correct.
to it.
Yes.
Mr. Rosenbaum is running towards Kyle Rittenhouse, correct?
Correct.
And there's nothing between those two individuals to block Mr. Rosenbaum's view, correct?
Correct.
Could have stopped at any time once he sees an armed individual, correct?
I assume he could have, yes.
He kept advancing.
Correct.
And he continues to advance until he makes a lunge for the weapon, correct?
Yes. It appeared that he was lunging for the front portion of the weapon.
Okay, which would be the business end of an AR-15.
Yes.
And you know, as you sit here today, that he yelled the words F you, but the whole words, correct?
Yes.
Okay. What was the tone of his voice as he yelled that?
Very angry.
As he goes at Kyle Rittenhouse, correct?
Correct.
And there's been some statements about him shot in the back. Don't dispute it. If you're Mr. Rittenhouse and I'm Mr. Rosenbaum, did you ever see him turn away from you back to Mr. Rittenhouse?
No.
Okay. And your vantage point would allow you to see if in fact this is the proverbial shooting an innocent person in the back, correct?
You mean, was I close enough?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. And as he shot, you never saw him turn around, look at you directly, and begin running away for the back shot, correct?
Correct.
You to the detective that evening describing the confrontation between Rosenbaum and Kyle Rittenhouse. In my best estimation, I think this individual and possibly the other individuals decided they were going to get his gun from him, correct?
I'm going to object to that. It calls for speculation.
It's his belief.
Well, you can explore what appeared to him to have happened, but when you say belief, people don't talk the way lawyers want them to. The lawyers want very strict adherence to just perception by the senses. In ordinary discourse, people don't talk that way. They combine a whole array of things that they see and perceive with all of their senses and their experience in life, and then they put that into the form of an impression. And now the lawyers, and I'm not singling out one lawyer or another, lawyers typically, they want, well, just as was referred to earlier, just the facts. I'm going to let the witness testify as one would ordinarily discourse with others, but keep in mind there's a huge component of things other than what he perceived with his senses, and then I'll let the state redirect on those issues, but he can answer the question.
Okay, I'll read the statement to you, and then I'll ask you why you believed it or why you thought that, okay?
Yep.
But in my best estimation, I think that the individual and possibly other individuals decided that they were going to get his gun from him. Do you remember telling Detective Sepperson?
I do, yes.
What was that statement based upon?
It was based upon the way that they were advancing towards him. It seemed that they were trying to move quickly, such that.
Katherine, this is kind of compelling, testimony to me. The defense lawyer taking it easy on him compared to the style that he's used with the other witnesses. I suspect that's because he's getting great data. Individuals are chasing him. It's dark. There's pops going off. He's cornered. He's got the gun at a 45-degree angle. Now he's saying his perception was that they were going to try to take the gun from him. And that certainly could put somebody in fear of serious bodily injury or death. How are you taking this testimony?
Yeah, it is more for the defense side when you look at this, especially when he testified that Rittenhouse was seemingly trapped in between the car and the wall. And he tried to say, well, he could have possibly moved in between the car and the wall, but it seemed like he was trapped. And that's not good for the prosecutor's side, because then he'd feel, what am I supposed to do when this person, Mr. Rosenbaum, was lunging at me? It's really tough. And you mentioned about the pop of the gun. I have to say, though, that, yeah, when I saw that video of there was a first pop of the gun and then Rittenhouse 4 gunshots to Mr. Rosenbaum, I was wondering, he probably would have thought that the gun was coming from Rosenbaum because he was running away. But then again, this witness, McGinnis, testified that, well, I didn't really think it was a gun, that first pop, because you heard pop all over the place. And we're thinking of what a reasonable person would have done in Rittenhouse's position. So would a reasonable person perceive it as a gun or just a pop?
Right. Andrew, something that I found interesting too is in the beginning of the testimony, he was indicating that he was not menacing, using that word, very cordial, nice, maybe too innocent. He was yelling medical, like he was there to help, and the rioters, this is the words that they're saying, didn't like people with guns or that were shouting medical, and that this is it kind of making him look like he was an innocent kind of guy that got in a bad situation, wasn't doing anything wrong, but the protesters are the ones that initiated this. That's certainly good for the defense as well, no?
Yeah, I agree that it was good for the defense, and I almost thought it was masterful how the defense attorney got the witness to use the term innocent there. I mean, what the witness meant, obviously, was he came off as kind of an innocent or naive person. But, obviously the word innocent in a criminal trial is a very loaded term here. So he made him sound like, oh, well, he was in this position where he didn't really seem to know what was going on. He didn't, and you also heard the testimony about the crowd of people who were looking at him, menacingly, or looking at him upset, kind of painting a scene of a situation that looks like Mr. Rittenhouse was threatened. So I think the defense attorney got a lot of good stuff out of that witness. And the witness wasn't even really trying to give that kind of good stuff. It was just the basis of good question asking and good scene building, good storytelling behind the defense attorney.
Yeah, the defense attorney also indicating that when he turned around, the victim could see that he had a weapon. He kept advancing him and said "F you" in a very angry and aggressive manner as he lunged for that weapon. All good for the defense of self-defense in this case. We're going to take a quick break here. We'll be back with more of this incredible testimony. We are on cross-examination of Richard McGinnis, a journalist who was actually there at the scene, watching the chase, videotape part of the incident while we were on break, saying that Mr. Rosenbaum went for the barrel of the weapon, and that's when the defendant leveled it up somewhat, and they were trying to get his gun, according to his perception, when they hear a shot being fired, all this going on at the same time. Let's go back live to the court.
Is that a Fair statement?
I'm going to object, Your Honor. I don't know how this witness could testify as to what Kyle Rittenhouse knew or did not know.
Well, his actual question was not what he knew, but rather whether he had, he asked whether, or he said he had no way of knowing. I think I'd be more comfortable if you rephrased your question.
To your knowledge, did Kyle Rittenhouse know that you were behind Mr. Rosenbaum?
I'm going to object, Your Honor. I don't know how this witness would know what Kyle Rittenhouse knew. It's a complete speculation as to the defendant's state of mind.
Overruled. Well, I think it would need to be phrased in terms of, did the physical circumstances suggest that Mr. Rittenhouse would have been in a position to know?
Sir, would Mr. Kyle Rittenhouse been in a position to know that you were behind Mr. Rosenbaum?
He was certainly close enough, but I wasn't looking at where he was looking. I was looking, like I said, at that point at the front portion of the weapon. It was quite light in that area, so it's very possible that I mean, if he had been looking in my direction, he certainly would have seen me.
But he's running away from where you are until he turns, and he has this guy coming at him, correct?
Correct.
And if Mr. Rosenbaum had stopped 5 or 7 feet away from him, would he have been shot?
I'm going to object, Your Honor.
Now, earlier there was, well, I'll go a little bit further. You get your giving aid to Mr. Rosenbaum after he's been shot 4 times. Were those shots slow, bang, 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 or were they in quick succession?
It was extremely quick. The night of, I said it was 3 or 4 because it was so quick that it was hard for me to count.
And now everyone agrees it's 4, and you do too?
Yes.
Okay. And after he's shot, you pick him up and you try to carry him to the hospital, but you stop at a vehicle, correct?
Correct.
What's happening to you as you're stopping or trying to get him to this vehicle? What's happening to you?
Well, there was a very large crowd around us. Everyone was yelling. I was getting bumped, and I thought that I was just being bumped by the crowd, but then, you know, I got bumped a little bit harder, and then I felt a fist hit my face as I was loading him into the back of the vehicle.
And you, sir, I felt what in my face?
A fist.
So there's a large group of people surrounding you and the other individual carrying Mr. Rosenbaum to the car.
Yes.
And people in that crowd were striking at you?
I can only identify the one person because, again, I thought I had a lot of adrenaline, and I didn't think that it was anything beyond getting, you know, being in a mob, a crowd of people who were all, you know, I guess very animated. A lot of people were yelling, and I didn't really feel it until it was like a hard punch to the side of my face, and I turned around and saw the individual, and he was pointing at me, like he was mad at me.
Like he wanted more punches at you, is that it?
Yeah, I at that point I was actually just entering the rear of the vehicle, and so he hit me, and I looked back, and I actually like kicked my legs towards where he was at the tailgate to get him away from me.
Thank you. And you go to that interview, and they're very interested in your phone, correct?
Correct.
You are told that they're either going to take your phone and get a search warrant or you'll give consent, correct?
Correct.
And you don't want to give up everything in your phone because it's your job and your livelihood. Is that a fair statement?
I didn't want to lose possession of my phone because it is my livelihood, yes.
Okay. Did they tell you they weren't going to go into your phone because of Marsy's law?
I don't recall that.
If somebody said that, you'd remember that, correct?
Yeah, what they said was, can we take your phone to download the videos? And I gave it to them. I don't recall anything about Marsy's law.
They told you if you didn't give them consent, they were going to get a search warrant, correct?
That is correct, yes.
And you were not written a curfew ticket, correct?
That's correct. I was not written one.
Now, you also testified about how at this riot, demonstration, whatever you want to call it, there were more firearms than you had seen at other places, correct?
Yes, well, I would say the most firearms was probably Seattle, but yes.
Okay. Portland, you can't open carry or you'll be arrested, correct?
I believe so.
New York, you can't open carry or you'll be arrested.
That's for sure.
For sure. Washington, D.C., can't open carry or you'll be arrested.
Correct.
Wisconsin, you can open carry.
Correct. You know
so
better
that makes
than I do.
that
Yes.
makes for a prevalence of guns.
Yes. And I believe the same in Seattle as well.
And the second night of the riots, you came to Kenosha and you saw the car source lot with all the cars, not the one where the shooting happened, but the one right below your hotel burned.
Yeah, it was burning every night.
Okay. But that was the night where most all of the cars went up.
Are you referring to Monday night?
Yes.
Yes. The
Okay.
night before the shooting, you're saying?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry to make myself clear. Monday night, the first car source lot with maybe 30, 40 cars goes up.
Yes.
Okay. And the fire department didn't come.
That was when we interviewed the individuals with the power washer and the buckets of water. I saw the fire department responding to a different fire at a furniture store, but not in front of that lot.
Okay. And that's the night where some cars got put on fire at Car Source 2, and they were trying to put it out with a power washer and I think buckets.
Like literally buckets and trash cans of
Okay.
water.
And that was citizens, not the fire department.
That's correct.
And and then I'll end, you had no fear or problem from Kyle or Mr. Balch when you went out on that patrol with them?
I would say that I was certainly fearful just in a general sense, given that there were weapons and that it was a chaotic environment.
Were you fearful of Mr. Balch and Mr. Rittenhouse?
At the time that I was walking with them?
Yes.
I was fearful of the potentiality that, those weapons would be used. So I would say like I was elevated in terms of my assessment of the risk involved in the situation. But I wouldn't say that I was specifically fearful of them individually. I was fearful of what might happen.
You're fearful of the situation in Kenosha on August 25th of 2020, all the armed people, the rioting, the chaos, and the social unrest.
And the guns, yeah.
And the guns.
Yeah.
And both sides had guns.
I actually didn't see, I know after seeing video, I do see that now, but the only armed individuals that I saw that night were in front of the business.
Okay. Thank you. I have nothing further.
Very effective cross-examination by the defendant in this case. We're going to take a quick break here on the Long Crime Network and come back with more, probably the redirect examination. Stay with us. All right, we are on redirect examination of Mr. McGinnis. Let's take a look at what the prosecutor thinks they need to clean up with respect to this witness. Let's go live.
pause, please. Okay, I will, yeah. Madam Court Reporter has asked if we can make sure that you have the microphone close.
yes.
I know I asked you to go up there, so that's my fault. What I'd like to do, if we could, is rewind 20 seconds, please. Okay. And I don't know if I can phrase this easily, Mr. McGinnis. I don't know how to put it. Do you feel like you would be able to point out any folks other than Mr. Rosenbaum that are moving towards the defendant or running after him I know you said their attention, and that can mean many things. So I guess I'm interested in physical movements. Are you able to point out any individuals that moved physically towards the defendant other than Mr. Rosenbaum?
Do you want to play it again?
Yeah, let's play it again. And I'd like you to keep an eye, well, before we start playing, I'm going to ask you, Mr. McGinnis, if you could please try and keep an eye on that for us and let us know if you see any of those folks. Maybe you can point them out for us. I'm interested in physical movements towards the defendant. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, let's go ahead and play it.
Can you go back one more time?
Yeah, sure. Let's go back 10 seconds. Is that far enough?
I just won, I guess, 10 more.
Sure. Let's do 10 more. Can we go back 10 more seconds? All right. Let's. Was that 10 seconds? Okay. This is the beginning. Why don't we? Can we go all the way back to the beginning of the video? All right. We'll start it from there.
I think that so when I told that to police, it was basically you can see me running up. There, just to my left, in the center of the street, there are some individuals who were yelling, and I guess it's not clear to me, whether they were just advancing in that direction and yelling, or advancing specifically towards Mr. Rittenhouse. But the individuals that I was referring to when I said that were in the bottom right portion of the screen. As I was running up, I basically ran past them.
It's clear from the video that Mr. Rosenbaum is specifically coming after Mr. Rittenhouse, chasing after him. The impression, maybe I misunderstood, it seemed to be that you were indicating you saw other people that were directly going after the defendant. Did you see anything like that? Other than Mr. Rosenbaum?
It seemed to me that they were turning their attention towards him, and that they were shouting at him. I wouldn't say that they were like I said, it wasn't like a chase. It was like a turning and kind of directing their attention, and it wasn't, a running at him, more of like turning their bodies towards him, and like those individuals in the bottom right of the screen seemed to be gravitating towards where he was.
But they were already headed in that direction anyway.
Yeah, that's unclear to me where they were. Like I said, I ran up and it was dark, so and I was on the phone, so I just heard the yelling and I saw attention. My eyes went to Mr. Rittenhouse because of where other people were looking.
Would you agree with me that in the video we're watching, this infrared video, this aerial footage, there aren't any other figures that are moving towards the defendant at any point other than Mr. Rosenbaum?
If you rewind, I believe that it's possible that they're just walking in that direction. So it's not.
Let's go back to the beginning of the video, and again, if you can use Sister Marciana's pointer and point out anyone that you believe is moving towards the defendant other than Mr. Rosenbaum. Okay, let's can you come back to the microphone, please? Yeah, where the one we use for the jurors? Oh.
And help?
Yeah, that might help. Why don't you bring that along with you when you go to the screen? And let's back up the video to the beginning again. And then you can feel free to speak into that microphone and tell us what you're seeing.
Hello? So when I said that, I was referring to this group right here in the street, and they were shouting.
Okay. And my last question to you, Mr. McGinnis, was, would you agree with me that on this video, none of those figures actually physically move towards the defendant? Would you agree with me on that?
They're moving in the direction of the defendant, but like I said, it's not clear whether they were already moving in that direction prior to my arrival. Yeah, and like I said, that it was their attention and their screaming was directed in his direction, so that's where my eyes went.
The defendant actually, and you both run up behind these people. You approach them from behind as they're walking forward.
Correct.
To your knowledge, did any of those folks look back at you as you were approaching from behind?
To me specifically?
Yeah.
Not that I can recall, no.
And in that lot, that car source lot, at this particular moment, there are some folks in the lot, certainly on the far corner of the lot there, where some parked cars are parked on the left side of the building. We all know now, with the benefit of hindsight, there's a large crowd there who are bashing the crap out of those cars, windows, the doors, everything. We know that with hindsight. Let me ask you this. When you were there that night, as this all is unfolding, again, try and put yourself back in that night without the benefit of hindsight, were you aware that there was a group of folks over there that were smashing out car windows or doing anything along those lines?
When I was on the phone with Shelby, she mentioned that something was going on up the street, but she said like she heard, I believe she said something along the lines of like there's like windows are breaking, and I assumed that was probably from the car windows being smashed, but other than that, no.
All right. You indicated that the defendant, when he was running away from Mr. Rosenbaum, I think the words you used was he entered a bit of a dead end as he was running by those cars and the building. Do you remember saying that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Now, on the video here, the person of interest number 2 with the square around him is the defendant. And person of interest number 1 with the circle around him is Mr. Rosenbaum. Can we please continue the video forward? Pause it right there, please. Where did our video go? Okay. I just want to be really clear on this, Mr. McGinnis. Other than Mr. Rosenbaum, did you see anyone else chasing the defendant?
The word chase, I wouldn't use that word to describe anybody else's actions.
Did you see anyone pursuing him physically in any way other than Mr. Rosenbaum?
Like I said, it's not clear to me whether those other individuals were, already heading in that direction. As for once Mr. Rittenhouse started to run, I didn't see anybody else running after him.
So Mr. Rosenbaum is running after the defendant. Other than that, no one else is coordinating with Mr. Rosenbaum or helping to corral the defendant or, pen him in or anything along those lines that you saw. Would you agree with me on that?
Beyond the screaming and the yelling and maybe walking in his direction, no.
The video here shows the defendant, person of interest number 2, and he is about to run. Let's continue the video to the end.
This witness is incredible with respect to this case, and I don't think the redirect's going anywhere, but we're going to take a quick break here in the Long Crime Network. We'll be right back. All right, prosecutor desperately trying to get stuff out on redirect examination to rehabilitate this witness in his case. Let's go back live to court.
To do or what he was intending to do or anything along those lines is complete guesswork, isn't it?
Well, he said, "Fuck you," and then he reached for the weapon.
Okay. Let's talk about that. At that very moment, you've testified, the defendant has turned around facing Mr. Rosenbaum, correct?
Correct.
The defendant has the gun in his hand.
Correct.
Mr. Rosenbaum is advancing and is pretty close.
Yes.
Correct? You believe, you've testified, that Mr. Rosenbaum is reaching for the barrel of the defendant's gun. Is that right?
Yes.
There are many possible reasons why an individual in that position would be reaching for a gun that's pointed in their direction. Would you agree with me on that?
Well, to clarify, the weapon was at a 45-degree angle, approximately. I don't know what you're asking. If you're asking if there's a reason why he would grab it.
You've already given us what you think is the reason. I'm suggesting there are other.
When did I say that I gave a reason? I just said that what he was trying to do. I didn't give any reason on why he would. I have no clue. I will say that as many times as you want me to, but I have no clue why he was doing what he did. But I saw him go for the front portion of the weapon, and it was clear to me that that's what he was trying to do.
When you say the front portion, you're talking about the fire, the end of the barrel where the bullet comes out.
It'd actually be more like the shroud.
So the what?
Well, it'd be it wasn't like he was grabbing for the very, very tip of the gun. It was like he was grabbing for the front portion of it. So like his hand, where he missed, was like, I guess 6 inches up the weapon.
Still on the barrel?
Yes. Oh, yeah, sure.
You indicated that the defendant, that Mr. Rosenbaum, I think you used the terms, he was in a low position running. Do you remember saying something to that effect?
Yes.
You have any idea how tall Mr. Rosenbaum was?
Is not very tall.
Shorter than the defendant?
Correct.
Shorter than you?
Correct.
And you said that when when Mr. Rosenbaum was reaching for the defendant's gun, the defendant, you've given us a physical gesture, and if I'm doing it correctly, and again, I'm going to ask you if I'm doing it correctly, it's like he's got the gun in his hands, the barrel is pointed to the defendant's left, he sort of moves it around almost up and over the outstretched hands of Mr. Rosenbaum. Would that be fair to say?
So that
to the defendant's,
left?
Yes.
It was aimed at a 45-degree angle towards the ground. I wouldn't say it was aimed to the left. It was aimed kind of, if you were to draw a line, it was aimed towards Mr. Rosenbaum, but at the ground.
Okay.
And then it was when he lunged that the weapon went to his left.
And again, with the pronouns, I just want to clarify. When Mr. Rosenbaum lunged, I'm using the proper names. When Mr. Rosenbaum lunged, Mr. Rittenhouse moved the gun.
Moved the gun to Mr. Rittenhouse's left, and to my right.
And by doing so, I know you've testified you're not sure whether or not Mr. Rosenbaum actually touched the gun. Fair enough?
Correct, yes.
But at any rate, by doing so, Mr. Rittenhouse was finally able to get that gun in a position where there wasn't any more risk of Mr. Rosenbaum grabbing it by doing that little maneuver, correct?
So at the point at which he dodged around, it was like they were extremely close, and so it's not clear to me what would have happened if those shots hadn't have been fired.
Final question. You talked at the end of your testimony about your feelings as you were accompanying the defendant and Ryan Balch. And you talked
Andrew, like unbelievable textbook what not to do on redirect examination. He's even getting out more evidence that justifies what happened here. he's basically saying there's a whole chaotic situation going on. And if I heard this right, in the very end, one of the last things before we cut is he wasn't sure what would have happened had the shots not been fired. Andrew, what is the prosecutor doing here?
I have no idea. He's lost it. He's lost the forest for the trees, and maybe even lost the forest. He might be somewhere. Who even knows? This is just going absolutely terrible for the prosecution. I can't imagine some of the little things that started, some of the little pieces of doubt that started with this testimony. He just seems to be intent on growing them and growing them and growing them.
Yeah, Katherine, I mean, he's providing character evidence by saying he's kind of an innocent guy and all that kind of thing. He wasn't worried about him. He's worried about people on a roof, that he's being chased, he's being cornered. And now he's going and saying that he wouldn't know what would have happened if the shots weren't fired. I got about 15 seconds. What are your thoughts?
Yes, I agree. I mean, that's probably going to be replayed at closing, and it's a good soundbite for the defense. And another good soundbite for them is when he testified that Rosenbaum said "F you" and then reached for the gun. I mean, he was trying to rehabilitate by trying to say, "Oh, he moved to the left."
I got to stop you there. Don't go anywhere, even though I'm done. Anjanette Levy is next to pick up the rest of this amazing case.